can't sleep? Then here's a story to keep you company. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. Let's settle in for a quiet story tonight." He zipped his duffel bag in the darkness, hands trembling as he worked the zipper teeth together as quietly as possible. The old wooden floor of the lake house creaked under each cautious step he took towards the door. Outside, the moon hung low over the still water, bathing the world in silver. It was well past midnight, closer to 3 a.m., and the only sounds were the distant chirr of crickets and the pounding of his own heart in his ears. James paused in the entryway, his fingers hovering over the cold metal door handle. He took one last look over his shoulder at the shadowy living room. The dying embers of the fireplace cast a faint orange glow on a circle of empty couches and chairs. Scenes of last night's laughter and joy now frozen in eerie quiet. It was hard to believe that just a few hours ago, this room had been filled with the warm buzz of friendly voices, with Kenzie's laughter ringing above them all. Now it felt like the aftermath of a storm, silent, tense, and full of things broken that couldn't be seen. His packed bag felt heavy in his hand, or perhaps it was his heart that made it so. He could still hear her words echoing in his mind, a drunken confession turned dagger. He was safe. I knew he wouldn't cheat or leave me. The memory of that moment made his chest tighten even now. He wasn't entirely sure where he was going to go in the dead of night, only that he needed to get away. Away from this house, away from her, away from the hurt that had taken root inside him. James inhaled deeply, catching the faint scent of ashes and spilled wine from the night's festivities. A part of him wanted to turn back, to stay and confront the issue in daylight. But the thought of facing everyone's pitying stares over breakfast, or worse, the awkward silence, was too much to bear. This was supposed to have been his perfect birthday weekend. So why did it feel like he was fleeing a crime scene? He slowly turned the knob and opened the door. The hinges gave a low groan, and James froze, glancing nervously down the hallway toward the bedrooms. No movement, no sound. Everyone was still asleep. Thank God. He stepped out into the cool night air and gently closed the door behind him, the latch clicking into place and sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet. For a moment, James stood on the porch of the lake house, bathed in moonlight. The weight of what he was doing settled on him. He was leaving behind his girlfriend, his friends, and the celebration she had so lovingly orchestrated. It should have been the happiest trip of his life. Instead, it had turned into something he couldn't yet fully wrap his head around. His car wasn't here. Kenzie had driven him out as part of the surprise. But down the gravel driveway, a pair of headlights flashed, briefly, twice, the signal they had agreed on. Grace was here, right on time, as promised. James felt a swell of gratitude tinged with shame. He hated dragging her into this mess, but there was no one else he could call at this hour. Grace had been his best friend since childhood, practically a sister to him, and when he had phoned her in a panic last night, voice shaking with anger and hurt, she had insisted on coming to get him first thing in the morning. He hefted his bag and made his way quietly across the dewy grass, leaving deep footprints in the soft ground. With each step, he felt a strange mix of numbness and pain. The shock had passed, replaced by a dull ache and confusion. The chill in the air raised goosebumps on his skin, or perhaps it was the anxiety of what came next. How was he going to explain this to everyone? To his friends? More importantly, what was he going to say to Kenzie? The thought of her name made that sharp pain flare again in his chest. As James approached the idling car at the end of the drive, the driver's side window rolled down. Grace leaned over from the driver's seat, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the dashboard. She looked tired and worried. She'd driven through the early morning darkness to reach him by dawn. Without a word, James opened the passenger door and slid in, dropping his bag at his feet. The gentle sounds of the waking forest filtered into the car as Grace turned the engine off to idle. They sat in silence for a beat, the weight of unspoken questions heavy between them. Grace eyed him, taking in the defeat in his slumped shoulders and the haunted look in his eyes. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, breaking the silence. Her voice was gentle, but James could hear the concern laced through it. He tried to answer, but at first nothing came out except a ragged sigh. Was he okay? He wasn't sure what he was. Finally, he managed, I couldn't stay there, Grace." Grace nodded as if she'd expected that answer. She reached over and squeezed his hand. "You don't have to explain right now," she said quietly. "I read your texts. I know enough." James swallowed the tightness in his throat. Last night, after he'd stumbled out of that living room reeling from Kenzie's words, Grace had been the first person he thought to call. She hadn't picked up immediately. She was working a night shift at the hospital, he remembered. But he'd left her a series of desperate messages, detailing the broad strokes of what had happened. She must have seen them on a break and called him back as soon as she could. He remembered that call in disjointed flashes, pacing outside under the dark sky, one hand pressed to his ear, the other rubbing at the dull headache forming in his temple, his voice trembling as he repeated Kenzie's drunken confession verbatim, like saying it out loud might make it easier to understand. The surge of emotion as he told Grace, "I think I have to leave. I can't do this." And Grace, alarmed and protective, telling him, "Then leave. You don't have to stay there. I'll come get you in the morning, okay? Just hang on until then." He hadn't slept at all after that. He'd spent the remainder of the night lying on the lumpy couch, staring at the ceiling in the dark, his mind running in circles. Again and again, he replayed her words. Safe, wouldn't cheat, safer option, nice enough. Each phrase stung, a blunt truth or a terrible misunderstanding, he couldn't be sure. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Kenzie's face in that moment, flushed with drink and candor, smiling obliviously as she inadvertently tore his heart out. Now, in Grace's car, away from the lake house and creeping dawn light, reality pressed in on him. He had actually done it. He had left. Part of him still couldn't believe he had gone through with it. Another part of him, a darker part, whispered that maybe he was overreacting, blowing a drunken mistake out of proportion. But then he recalled the heat of humiliation on his cheeks, the stunned silence of their friends around that coffee table, and Kenzie's careless words slurring out for everyone to hear, and he knew exactly why he left. Grace turned the key in the ignition, and the engine rumbled softly back to life. As she guided the car down the gravel road, she cast another sideways glance at him. The trees around them were tall and dense, silhouettes against the growing light in the east. "Do you want to talk about it now?" she asked gently. "Or do you just want some quiet?" James opened his mouth, then closed it. The truth was, he didn't know what he wanted. One part of him was dying to spill everything, to make sense of the chaos in his heart with his oldest friend. Another part just felt exhausted and utterly empty. He rubbed a hand over his face, feeling the grit of dried tears he hadn't realized he'd shed. Maybe just some quiet, he decided in a low voice, barely audible over the hum of the engine. For now. Grace nodded. Okay. She said nothing else, respecting his need for silence. In that moment, James was grateful for her understanding. Grace had always been like that. She knew when he needed to talk and when he needed to just be. As the car navigated the winding road through the woods, James stared out the window. The world outside was slowly coming alive with morning. Mist clung to the ground between the pines and oaks, and through occasional gaps in the trees, he glimpsed the surface of the lake, flat as glass and reflecting the pale pink of dawn. The same lake that yesterday he had been cannonballing into with whooping laughter, Kenzie shrieking as she jumped in after him. The memory hit him like a punch to the gut. How happy they had been just hours ago. How quickly everything had changed. His mind drifted back to the start of the weekend, trying to piece together how something that began so right had gone so wrong. It was hard to believe that barely 24 hours ago, James had been riding in Kenzie's car with the biggest grin on his face, feeling like the luckiest man alive. That previous afternoon had been full of nothing but excitement and joy. Late Friday, Kenzie had shown up outside James's office earlier than expected for their simple birthday dinner plans. Instead of just meeting him at the door, she had practically bounced out of her car and intercepted him on the sidewalk, her eyes alight with mischief. She had insisted on putting a blindfold around his eyes the moment he stepped out of the building. Patience, birthday boy. Kenzie had laughed as he protested in confusion. The blindfold was soft against his face, and he could hear the barely contained excitement in her voice. Kenz, what's going on? James had chuckled, playing along even as she gently guided him forward. You'll see, was all she said, positively glowing with anticipation. He heard the trunk of her car click open, followed by the shuffle of bags and a few hushed giggles. The warm summer breeze carried her perfume, jasmine and vanilla, helping to calm the flutter in his stomach. When at last she pulled the blindfold off, James blinked in the late afternoon sunlight. His eyes adjusted to see Kenzie standing before him, biting her lip to hold back a grin. Before he could speak, the back door of her car flew open and two people tumbled out. "Surprise!" shouted his best friend, Tom, and Tom's wife, Rachel, nearly tackling James with a double hug. They were grinning ear to ear. Over their shoulders, James saw the back seat of Kenzie's car packed to the brim with duffel bags, a cooler, and even a couple of wrapped gifts. He stood dumbfounded as Tom and Rachel released him. What is all this?" James stammered, looking from his friends to Kenzie in astonishment. Kenzie's face was glowing with excitement. "Happy birthday, James," she said, throwing her arms out. "We're not just having dinner, we're kidnapping you for the weekend." Tom clapped him on the shoulder. "Your lady here orchestrated the whole thing. A weekend at your favorite lake, buddies included." Rachel thrust a travel mug of iced coffee into James's hand. "For the drive," she said with a wink. James was floored. "You planned all this?" he asked Kenzie, incredulous and touched. She nodded enthusiastically, her ponytail bouncing. "A whole weekend getaway. I rented a house right on the water and invited all our friends. We've got a big crew coming. Some already headed up earlier to get things ready." James was at a loss for words. He looked at Kenzie, marveling at her triumphantly sweet smile and the love shining in her eyes. She'd done this incredible thing for him, completely behind his back. His chest swelled with emotion. In lieu of words, he stepped forward and scooped Kenzie into a hug, lifting her off the ground. She yelped in surprise and then, laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair, his throat tight. I can't believe you did this." She squeezed him back. "You deserve it," she murmured. "I wanted to make it a birthday you'd never forget." James set her down gently, and for a moment he just gazed at her. 2 years together, and still she could astonish him. He leaned in and kissed her, soft and grateful, ignoring the playful gagging noises Tom made in the background. Soon enough, they were piled into Kenzie's car, James up front with her, Tom and Rachel in the back. As they pulled away from the city, James felt a lightness, a pure, giddy joy bubble up inside. He reached over and laced his fingers with Kenzie's, giving her hand a tender squeeze. "You're amazing, you know that," he said softly, so only she could hear. She glanced at him with a sparkle in her green eyes and squeezed back. "Just you wait," she said teasingly. "The best is yet to come." They arrived at the lake house as dusk was settling. The place was even more beautiful than James imagined. A rustic, 2-story cabin with a wide porch and strings of fairy lights already twinkling in the early night. 2 other cars were parked out front. The moment James stepped out, a chorus of cheers erupted from the porch. A crowd of their friends and family were there. Mark and his girlfriend from James's office, a couple of Kenzie's closest girlfriends, his old college roommate, Kenzie's older sister Becca, and her husband Stephen. They all had gathered for him. James felt an overwhelming surge of happiness as he made his way through the sea of hugs and high fives. It was almost too much to take in, the effort Kenzie had put into this. The night that followed was like something out of a dream. They grilled food on the deck under the stars, everyone laughing and eating to their heart's content. Someone brought out a guitar and played a clumsy but heartfelt rendition of Happy Birthday, as Kenzie carried out a small chocolate cake lit with candles. James caught her eye across the flickering light. Her face was full of affection as she led the song. He blew out the candles to applause, wondering how he'd gotten so lucky. Later, inside the cabin's cozy living room, they continued the celebration. A few of the group started an impromptu charades game, while others chatted over drinks. James found himself nestled comfortably on a couch with Kenzie leaning against him, her legs draped over his lap. He absently stroked her calf as they watched one of his friends dramatically act out an entire movie in under a minute, sending the room into hysterics. He felt contentment settle in him like a warm blanket. Glancing down at Kenzie, he saw pure joy on her face as she laughed along with everyone. In that moment, James thought to himself that this weekend might truly be the happiest he'd ever been. When the long day finally caught up to everyone, people began to retire to their rooms. The cabin had plenty of space. Couples split off to various guest rooms, offering cheery good nights and see you tomorrows. Kenzie tugged James's hand and led him upstairs to the master suite that she'd obviously claimed for them. The moment the door shut, she was beaming up at him. "So, was it a good birthday so far?" she whispered, looping her arms around his neck. James chuckled softly. "Good? Kenz, it's incredible. I still can't believe you did all this." She gave a little shrug, though her eyes shone with pride and happiness. "You do so much for me. I wanted to do something special in return." James brushed a strand of hair off her forehead. He felt his heart swell. He had the urge to tell her right then that he loved her, words that had been on the tip of his tongue for weeks. But something held him back. Maybe he was waiting for the perfect moment, or maybe he was just a little scared. Instead, he leaned down and kissed her gently. "You're unbelievable," he murmured, resting his forehead against hers. Kenzie smiled. "Sleep well, birthday boy. Tomorrow's going to be even better." With that promise lingering in the air, they crawled into the plush, king-sized bed, limbs entwined. Kenzie fell asleep in his arms not long after, but James lay awake a bit longer, listening to her soft breathing and thinking he must be the luckiest man in the world. The next day, Saturday, dawned bright and clear. True to her word, Kenzie had more surprises up her sleeve. After a leisurely breakfast on the porch, she revealed she'd rented a speedboat for the afternoon. James's face had lit up like a child's. He adored boating, having grown up spending summers on this very lake with Grace and other friends. The plan was to take turns on the boat, maybe do some tubing or fishing. But the boating excursion was planned for later. The morning and midday were left to everyone's own devices. Some opted to lounge and sunbathe by the water, while a group went on a short hike to a nearby viewpoint. James and a few others decided to cool off with a swim. They raced each other off the dock, causing uproarious splashes and good-natured shoving matches in the water. At one point, James hoisted a shrieking Kenzie over his shoulder and threatened to dunk her if she didn't swear fealty to him as the birthday king. She was laughing so hard she could barely manage a reply, eventually howling out, "Okay, okay, you're the king," which earned her a merciful toss into the water rather than a drop. It was silly, it was fun, and it was everything James had ever wanted from a weekend with the people he loved most. His cheeks hurt from grinning by the time they all clambered out of the water, dripping and breathless. Around mid-afternoon, after everyone had their fill of sun, they decided to save the boat ride for Sunday, since a few people were napping, and others were in the middle of a board game tournament on the porch. The vibe was pleasantly lazy. They had an entire weekend, no need to rush any activity. As golden hour approached, painting the sky and lake in honeyed tones, the group reconvened in the living room for a pre-dinner hangout. This naturally morphed into the evening's entertainment, games and drinks. Becca emerged from the kitchen brandishing a deck of cards with a wicked grin, and the couple's confessions game was introduced. Everyone groaned in unison, with grins betraying their curiosity. They arranged themselves in a rough circle around the coffee table. On the couch, the armchairs, and some sprawled on the rug. James settled on the floor, back against the base of the couch, and Kenzie slid down to sit beside him instead, nestling comfortably against his side. She'd opened another bottle of her favorite sweet white wine and was already a glass or two in, judging by her flushed cheeks and the extra shine in her eyes. The game began tamely enough. One card prompted a competition over who was the messiest couple. Mark and his girlfriend lost that one amid laughter, as he pointed to the pile of his shoes she always complained about. Another asked who had the better cooking skills, which led to a playful debate and some whistling, when Kenzie cheekily claimed any cooking James could do, she could probably do better. He nudged her at that, and she giggled, planting a kiss on his shoulder in appeasement. All around, the group was loosening up, the drinks and good company fueling an atmosphere of light-hearted revelry. They kept score on the little dry erase boards, though no one truly cared who won. It was all in good fun. Then Becca drew the question that would change everything. She cleared her throat theatrically. "What originally attracted you to your partner?" She read aloud, then immediately hooted. "Ooh, juicy one. Okay, everyone, think back to the beginning." "Oof, Making us reminisce, huh? Stephen teased, nudging his wife, Becca. You go first, honey. Let's see if your memory matches mine. Becca laughed and looked at Stephen with a soft smile. All right. What originally attracted me to Stephen, she said for the group, was how genuinely sweet he was. On our first date, he spent half the time helping a lost elderly man find his way home. I knew then and there he had a heart of gold. A chorus of awe went around. Stephen blushed, and in return he recounted how Becca's loud, infectious laugh at one of his bad jokes that night had charmed him beyond repair. They shared a quick kiss. Next was Tom and Rachel. Rachel teased that she first fell for Tom because of his nice butt when they met at the gym, which made everyone burst into laughter as Tom covered his face. But as the laughter died down, she added softly that actually it was how gentle and respectful he was from day one. Tom, still red-faced, responded that Rachel's boldness and confidence drew him like a magnet. One by one, each couple answered with a mix of humor and sincerity. The mood was warm, sentimental. James felt Kenzie squeeze his hand as they listened to others. He wondered what she would say. They had never really talked about that exact question in their 2 years together. He himself would have said it was her energy, the way she lit up every room and made everyone feel at ease, and her kindness, like how she befriended Grace in college and looked out for her when James couldn't. And, of course, her smile had made his heart skip even that first night at the barbecue. But compressing that into a single answer was hard. Finally, it was their turn. All eyes turned to James and Kenzie. Kenzie was a beat quicker. Possibly the wine had loosened her tongue, or perhaps she was just eager to share. She sat up a little, waving a hand as if to say, "I've got this one." Her voice was a touch loud in the intimate circle as she declared, "Oh, that's easy." James felt a small, anticipatory smile on his lips, curious and a little bashful to hear her answer. Kenzie turned to him with a grin. What first attracted me to James was that, well, he was safe. The word landed in the air strangely. A few eyebrows went up around the circle. Kenzie, oblivious or unworried, continued. Yeah, he was safe. I just knew he wouldn't cheat or leave me or anything like that. James's smile froze. He blinked at her, not sure he'd heard right. Safe? His mind stumbled over the word, trying to process its meaning in this context. Kenzie didn't notice his expression. She was gesturing now, warming to her explanation. Like, he seemed nice enough, you know? After my abusive ex, I really wanted a safer option. Someone who wouldn't hurt me. She nodded as she spoke, as if confirming to herself this made perfect sense, a silly, drunk grin on her face. The silence that fell was sudden and heavy. It felt as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. The smile on James's face collapsed, replaced by an expression of blank shock. He heard someone, maybe Mark, let out a low "whoa" under his breath. Rachel's eyes widened, darting nervously to James. Tom looked down at his hands, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. James's cheeks burned. He could feel the heat rising, his heart thumping strangely fast. Safe? Nice enough. A safer option. Each phrase echoed in his head, each one worse than the last. He realized Kenzie was looking at him now, a faint crease between her brows as if registering a shift in his demeanor. "Babe," she murmured uncertainly, reaching for his arm. She was still tipsy, her movements a bit slow. "You okay?" He couldn't answer. His throat had closed up. He needed to get out of there. Now. I need to use the restroom, James mumbled, barely getting the words out. He stood abruptly, stepping over Kenzie's legs and nearly tripping. He avoided everyone's eyes and made a beeline for the hallway. As soon as he was out of sight of the living room, he detoured, pushing through the back door and into the cool evening. The screen door banged lightly behind him. Outside, dusk had deepened into night. Crickets were chirping, and the silhouettes of trees swayed gently in the breeze. James gulped in the fresh air as if he'd been suffocating. In a way, he had been, suffocating under a wave of humiliation, hurt, and confusion. He stepped off the porch and onto the grass, walking a few paces toward the dark outline of the lake. His chest felt tight, and he realized he was shaking. What the hell just happened? Safe. Nice enough. A safer option. The words clanged around in his mind, each one knocking the breath out of him again. He thought of every tender moment they'd shared, every time he'd felt truly connected and loved by her. Had it all been in her mind because he was just a safe bet? Not because she was passionately in love with him, not because she admired him or desired him, but because he was reliable, stable, convenient. He remembered joking often that she was out of his league. It had become a light-hearted refrain between them whenever she got dolled up for a date night or when he saw other guys checking her out at the bar. "Don't know what you're doing with a guy like me," he would jest, and she'd always roll her eyes and kiss him, telling him he was being silly. But a part of him had always believed it. Now she had essentially confirmed his worst fear. She settled for him. James felt something hot and bitter rise in his throat. Tears pricked the edges of his eyes. He furiously blinked them away. He would not cry. Not here, not now. With trembling hands, James reached into his pocket for his phone. In the dark, the screen glowed as he dialed the one person he could think of. Grace. She answered on the third ring, sounding concerned at receiving a call at such a late hour. "James, everything okay?" As soon as he heard her voice, the facade of composure he'd been barely holding on to crumbled. In a low, strained voice, he explained what had happened in halting fragments. "We were playing this game. Couples questions. She said she picked me because I was safe, that I wouldn't cheat or leave, that I was a safer option after her ex." Saying it out loud made it real all over again. A mix of anger and despair trembled in his words. Grace was silent for a moment, absorbing it. When she replied, there was an edge to her voice James had rarely heard. "She said that? In front of everyone?" He choked out a mirthless laugh. "Yeah, everyone heard. You could have heard a pin drop." "Oh, James." Grace's tone was gentle now, sympathy pouring through. "I can't stay here," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "I feel like a fool. I just walked out. I might just leave." Grace didn't miss a beat. "Do it. You don't have to stay there and feel like that. If you want to come home, then come home. I'll come get you." He hadn't expected her to agree so quickly. Really?" "Of course," she said fiercely. "You're not trapped. If it hurts too much to stay, then don't. I'll drive up first thing. Actually." He heard the sound of keys jangling in the background. "I'll leave in a few hours before dawn so I can be there in the morning. I don't want you driving when you're upset, even if you had a car there." Relief crashed over him in a wave. He didn't even realize how badly he'd wanted someone to give him permission to put himself first in that moment. "Thank you, Grace." "Hang in there, okay?" she said. "Just get through the night. I'll be there soon, and we'll figure it out." They hung up, and James stood in the darkness for a minute, letting the cool air dry the angry tears that had escaped during the call. His heart was still hammering, but he felt a tiny bit steadier. He had an exit plan. He crept back into the house as quietly as possible. The living room was emptier now. Most of the others had apparently sensed it was time to make themselves scarce. Only a few stragglers remained, cleaning up the game materials with an air of awkwardness. They looked up when he entered, and he could see the concern and curiosity in their faces, but thankfully no one bombarded him with questions. Kenzie was on the couch, wringing her hands. The moment she saw him, she jumped up. Her eyes were glassy, panic written all over her features. "James," she said, her voice small. "Hey, are you all right?" He couldn't do this, not here. For all his simmering turmoil, he also felt the eyes of friends covertly watching. He swallowed hard, mustering a tight nod. "We'll talk later, okay? Not tonight." "But—" she started, reaching towards him, her fingers grazing his arm as if to reel him back in. He stepped out of reach, gently but firmly. "Not now, Kenzie," he said, more sharply than he intended. Softening his tone, he added, "Let's just get through the night." Kenzie's face fell. He could tell she was hurt and scared, but she nodded. Perhaps the haze of alcohol made her more pliant, or maybe some part of her realized she had crossed a line. "Okay," she whispered. With an uncomfortable silence hanging in the air, they all decided to call it a night. One by one, people murmured awkward good nights and retreated to their rooms, clearly relieved to escape the tension. James retreated too, though not to the shared bedroom he'd so happily occupied the night before. Instead, he quietly gathered his toiletry bag and a change of clothes from the bedroom, while Kenzie was in the attached bathroom. He caught a glimpse of her in the mirror, splashing water on her face, her expression one of distress. She saw him in the reflection and opened her mouth to speak, but he had already turned away. He couldn't handle a confrontation or tearful scene right now. He just needed to be alone. He took his things downstairs to the living room couch. Tossing a pillow and blanket onto it, he settled down for what would be a long, sleepless night. His phone glowed with a new message from Grace confirming she'd set out pre-dawn, and that alone gave him enough comfort to eventually drift into a shallow, restless sleep as the first light of morning crept in. When the sky had lightened to a misty gray, James was already awake, exhaustion pressing heavy on his bones without having truly rested. Quietly as a ghost, he finished packing his duffel. In the kitchen, he scribbled a quick note and left it on the counter where it would be easily seen. "Didn't want to cause drama. Went home for the weekend. We can talk when you're back. Jay." He felt a pang of guilt imagining Kenzie finding it, but he reminded himself this was temporary. He just needed space. With his bag in hand, heart pounding, James slipped out the front door. The morning was dewy and cool. Down the gravel drive, just as promised, Grace's car was waiting, headlights off. He hurried over, tossed his bag in the back, and got in. Grace gave him a once-over, and her face crumpled into sympathy. "Oh, James," she murmured, but he shook his head, indicating he didn't want to discuss it yet. Not here. The tires crunched over the gravel as they pulled away, and James cast one last, aching look at the lovely lake house in the soft dawn light. This place that had been filled with laughter and happiness had become the scene of one of the worst moments of his life. He turned forward and closed his eyes. Back in the quiet of his own apartment later that day, the events of the trip felt almost surreal to James. Had it really all happened in just one day's time? Saturday blurred by for him. After Grace dropped him off, he spent most of the day isolated and nursing his wounds. He ignored the flurry of calls and texts after his absence was discovered, letting his phone eventually buzz itself silent. For a few hours, he even escaped to the golf course, a place he often went to clear his head. He walked the course alone, not even caring about his swing, just needing the open space to work through the storm of emotions inside. With each slow stride on the green, he replayed everything. The wonderful moments now tinged with bitterness, the shock on his friends' faces, the look in Kenzie's eyes as she realized something was terribly wrong. The more he thought about it, the more conflicted he felt. He knew Kenzie had been drunk and probably didn't frame her thoughts well. He knew her past. He of all people understood why trust and safety were paramount to her. But still, the sting of being seen as merely a safe choice cut deep. By the time Sunday rolled around, James was emotionally exhausted and still without clear answers. He had neither responded to Kenzie nor reached out to her. He needed to. He knew that. He couldn't avoid her forever. As if on cue, early Sunday afternoon came the knock on his apartment door that he had been both dreading and craving. When he opened it, Kenzie stood there, her weekend bag still slung over her shoulder, eyes red from crying. For a moment, they just stared, each taking in the other's appearance, both looking worn down and heart-sore. He invited her in quietly. She stepped inside, and the silence pressed in around them. "You left," she said after a moment, her voice trembling. There was hurt in her tone, and guilt, too. "You know why I did," James replied softly, leaning against the arm of his couch, arms crossed in a self-hug. Kenzie nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I was drunk and I wasn't thinking. But that's no excuse. I messed up, James. I never meant to hurt you." James took a shaky breath. Hearing the crack in her voice twisted his heart. Despite his anger, he hated seeing her like this. "Why did you say it?" he asked, the question that had been burning in him since that moment. "Do you really see me that way? As just some safe option? Someone you settled for because you think I'd never leave you?" Kenzie's eyes went wide and she quickly shook her head. "No, that's not how I see you at all." She stepped closer, wringing her hands, searching for words. "James, I know it sounded horrible. When I said safe, I meant it as a good thing, but it came out completely wrong." He stood silent, letting her speak. She swallowed hard. "After what I went through with my ex, you know how broken I was, how scared I was to trust anyone. When I met you, you were so kind to me, so patient. You made me feel comfortable and secure for the first time in forever. That's what I meant by safe. That with you, I felt protected, cherished. I didn't have to put my guard up." Her voice cracked, but she continued. "I didn't mean safe as in boring, or that I'm not attracted to you, or any of those awful things it sounded like. I worded it horribly. The phrase nice enough, I don't even know why I said that. It was the wine talking. You're more than nice enough. You're everything to me." James's hardened posture slumped a little as he listened. The raw sincerity in her tone chipped away at the wall around his heart. "I should have said," Kenzie went on, voice quavering, "that what attracted me to you was your heart. The way you genuinely care about people, about me. Like how you were there every step when I finally opened up about my past. Or how you remembered to bring me flowers on random days just to make me smile. That's what I was trying to get at, in the worst way possible. She wiped at her eyes. I wasn't thinking about how my words would sound. I was just blurting out my feelings without a filter. James closed his eyes briefly. The memory of the card game was still painful, but her explanation was shedding new light on it. It really hurt, he said quietly, his voice thick. I've always tried to be more than just the nice guy or the rebound. I wanted to be someone you chose because you love me, not just because I wouldn't hurt you. Kenzie took another step, now within arm's reach. I do love you, she said softly. His eyes snapped open at those words. It felt like the air changed in the room. She let out a shaky breath. I love you, James. I didn't say it before, and I should have. I was scared to put it all out there because the last time I said that to someone I got hurt. But that's not fair to you. You deserve to hear it and to know it. I love you so much, and the thought that I made you feel like I don't, it's killing me. For a moment, James forgot how to breathe. He had longed to hear those words from her lips for what felt like ages. To hear them now, in the midst of tears and regret, was not how he'd pictured it. But he realized something. Kenzie had never said she loved him before, and maybe some part of him had been waiting, needing that affirmation to erase his doubt. He stepped forward and gently took her hands, which were cold and shaking. You love me?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, biting her lip. Yes, I do. I know I messed everything up, but that's the truth. James's chest tightened, a mix of relief and pain. I love you too, he admitted quietly. I have for a while. A soft sob of relief escaped her, and she practically fell against him, wrapping her arms around his waist. James held her close on instinct, closing his eyes as she burrowed her face against his shoulder. They stood there, clinging to each other in the hush of the apartment, both of them shaking with emotion. I'm sorry, Kenzie kept repeating in a muffled voice against his shirt. I'm so sorry. I know, he murmured into her hair. He stroked her back, trying to soothe her even as his own tears finally spilled over, silent and hot down his cheeks. They moved to the couch and sat down, still tangled up in each other. Kenzie pulled back just enough to look at him. Her makeup from the trip was smudged, eyes puffy. He imagined he didn't look much better. But to him, she was still beautiful, because she was here and she cared. I ruined your birthday, she said sorrowfully. James managed a faint, half smile. The cake was good, though. She blinked, then gave a wet laugh. It was supposed to be perfect, she sighed. He squeezed her hand. It was, mostly, until I got in my head. Maybe I overreacted, I don't know. No, she said firmly. You had every right to be upset. I just want to fix it. I want us to be okay. Her earnestness was like sunshine breaking through the fog of his doubt. He nodded slowly. We will be. I'm still hurt, Kens. I won't lie. But hearing what you really meant, and that you love me, his voice wavered. That makes a difference. She cupped his cheek gently. I do, James. I love you. And not just because you make me feel safe. I love you because you're goofy and sweet, and you get excited about stupid things like comic book movies. I love that you care about my family, and that you double-check I've eaten on days I'm stressed. I even love that you need 20 alarms to wake up because it's kind of cute. She smiled through her tears, and he huffed a quiet laugh. I guess what I'm saying is, I didn't settle for you. I chose you, because being with you makes me happier than I've ever been. A weight James didn't know he'd been carrying for a long time lifted off his shoulders at her words. All his insecurity about being not good enough for her, about her being out of his league. It all started to fade. He realized, somewhat humbly, that he was exactly what she wanted in the ways that truly mattered. "I'm sorry I left like that," he said after a moment. "I should have at least talked to you, or left when you were awake. I panicked." "I know why you did," she said. "It's okay. I'm not mad, I promise. I was hurt at first, but mostly at myself for causing it." They spent the next hour just talking, really talking, like they hadn't in a long time. They dissected the thorny subject that had come between them, her trauma from the past, his secret feelings of inadequacy. It was difficult, and there were more tears on both sides, but it felt good to lay it all out in the open. Kenzie insisted on describing all the little things she adored about him that she hadn't voiced enough. How safe in her context meant cherished, not settling. James, in turn, confessed to some of his lingering insecurities. They realized that this crisis, as awful as it was, forced them to communicate about things they had both been holding back. By the time the sun began dipping low, golden light spilling into the apartment, they were curled up together on the couch, too emotionally drained to do much else. Kenzie's head rested on James's chest, and he played softly with her hair. There was a comfortable silence as they watched the shadows lengthen. Finally, Kenzie spoke, voice drowsy. "You know, in a really twisted way, maybe this was a good thing." James raised an eyebrow. "How so?" She sighed, snuggling in a bit more. "It forced us to be honest. I think I took for granted that you knew how I felt, and you bottled up how some things made you feel too. If last night hadn't happened, we might have kept coasting and ignoring those deeper feelings. Not that I recommend a repeat," she added wryly, "but still." James considered that. She wasn't wrong. As painful as it had been, the crisis had cracked them open, leading to this moment of raw truth and closeness. "I get what you mean," he agreed quietly. "No repeating it, though." "No," she agreed emphatically, drawing a finger across her throat in a dramatic gesture, which made him chuckle. "Next time I play a drinking game, I'll just say you have a nice butt or something shallow," she teased lightly. Then her expression sobered. "I'm kidding. But really, next time, I'll speak from the heart and not through a haze of wine." James smiled and tipped her chin up to place a tender kiss on her lips. "Deal." They fell back into contented silence. A sense of peace crept over James for the first time since that awful moment. Kenzie's slow, steady breathing against him was soothing, and he found his own eyelids growing heavy as the emotional exhaustion caught up. Before sleep took him, a few final thoughts drifted through James's mind. He realized that in relationships, being safe wasn't a bad thing at all. It was what allowed someone like Kenzie to love again after being hurt. And being someone's safe place didn't mean there was no passion or excitement. It meant there was trust, the kind of trust that anchors love through life's storms. He hadn't seen it clearly before, but now he did. And he also saw that being open about his own feelings and fears was just as important as being understanding of hers. They had both learned something valuable. As he felt himself dozing off with Kenzie in his arms, one question echoed softly in his thoughts. When it comes to love, is being someone's safe haven really a flaw? Or is it perhaps the quiet strength that every lasting relationship needs? James didn't have a definite answer, but as he held the woman he loved close, he felt that perhaps being safe wasn't such a bad thing after all.